Why don't you have the jury come up? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if this is any better. I think I gotta shut everything down to look at everything. It's my computer, so I might get a message about it. I'm not gonna do it since I have to. Right, we can be seated. Ms. Gilman, come on up here. It's hard not to call you Corcoran after all this time. You're still under oath.
So, Ms. Gumman, we ended with People's Exhibit 478, and that was admitted into evidence. I'll let the jury look at that afterwards, but that essentially is a compilation of all the certifications, correct?
468?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And then I had misspoke and said that you didn't include the failed test, but you corrected everyone. It's actually included in there.
Yes.
And when the jury sees it, it indicates a failed test.
Yes.
So that was in 2008.
Correct.
And then later in 2008 through 2015, that's the package that is 468 for them to review later?
Yes.
Has it been admitted?
Yes.
Your Honor,
Our objection then to the admission of this would be
It's been
relevant.
admitted.
Relevant.
It's been admitted. So we're done. You don't get to argue 3 times, okay?
Well,
How many times have we had this conversation, Mr. Moran, over the years?
I have no idea. Your Honor, I didn't object relevance. I'm sorry at what I said. I think was, I don't understand the basis with which it's coming in, and that was where it was left, I think. So.
No, that was after I admitted, when you said that, okay?
Okay.
So you get a chance to object, I get to rule, and then you move on. So, let's see.
I wasn't certain you'd ruled, so thank you. I appreciate the
All right.
clarification.
So, Ms. Gutman, and then, so far we've talked about your credentials, and then we talked about Molly a little bit. We talked about Molly's breed, and then we talked about Molly's training. I want to segue now to Molly's experience in the field. How many years did you work Molly out on searches?
I worked her from 2008 to 2016 or 17.
How many, has she recovered human bodies working out in the field?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this line of inquiry. This witness will testify that reliability is not established by things that happen out in the field. It's been repeated over and over again in proceedings on this particular issue. So the fact that there are previous occasions that don't go towards reliability, we object to any further testimony about that. And that's consistent with your Honor's ruling that it's the reliability as established by certification. And I know this witness will agree, and has in the past, that reliability is not based on things that happen in the field because you can't confirm it.
You're ruled, and it's certainly an area of cross-examination and potentially other witnesses. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I would cite to Brooks as well as a factor that I do have to cover and will cover.
Right.
So we were talking about breed and training, but now we're going to talk about field experience. And I asked you the question, has she actually recovered human bodies in the times that you've worked there?
Yes.
How many roughly?
She's assisted in the recovery of approximately 14 or 15 whole bodies.
Okay. And so is this in the context, for example, of like search and rescue or different crime scenes, all those types of contexts?
In a variety of different situations, yes.
When you say assisted in recovering the human body, this is a case where you know a body to have been found at the end of her search.
Later learned that human remains were recovered in the area where she worked and then provided her trained final response.
Got it. And then in addition to that, has she done cases where she's searched a house, let's say in search and rescue, and cleared that house with no indications, and that person is later found to be alive and well?
Your Honor, objection. We lack the discovery to challenge this evidence. This would be required in the Rule 16 based on previous rulings of this court. If this information can be presented to the jury, it's something that we should have been provided in a way that we could double check it. We just don't have it.
I remember this testimony from a couple of years ago. And so if you wanted something that you didn't have, you certainly could have asked for it in the past 2 years. You're overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
We did.
Judge,
Well, did you bring it back up to me that you didn't get it?
Yes.
yes, Judge, you ruled on this.
Okay.
There was a motion filed and the court ruled that the people had complied with discovery. I provided a list of these cases to Mr. Moran nearly 2 years ago. And as the court pointed out, this was done at the hearing as well.
All right.
And we were not able to corroborate these because there were years and general regions and there just isn't police reports going back that far.
Well, that's not a reason to object and say it's not right. I mean, you can point that out to the jury, which you just have. You can do it again on cross-examination. You're overruled.
And then, Judge, finally, I know the court had said no speaking objections, but at this point, there's been several, and it's
I
interrupted.
understand.
Thank you, Judge. So I'm going to come back to this very same topic. So you had talked about 14 or 15 bodies recovered, and then you talked about a search and rescue context where Biddy would go into a home and clear it, and that would be corroborated later as well, a person's alive and well.
Yes.
And then is there also situations where Biddy had done work in a case and you didn't have information as to where remains were, but later it was corroborated that remains had once been there, but were then removed?
Yes.
Objection, that would require reliance on hearsay for her to understand that. And the other objections I need to include here. But hearing about these things later in evidence that has not been provided to us is a due process
Well,
issue.
hold on. This is the exact same thing that we did 2 years ago. So it has been provided to you. Number one, I've already made a ruling on discovery. Number two, and number three, it's being offered to show that she was accurate, at least from this witness's perspective, not for the truth of the matter asserted.
Because of things people told her later, which would be to the,
I made my ruling, and I understand your objection. I'm sorry you don't understand my rulings, but please accept my rulings. Have a seat.
Helpful for council, it's in discovery, page 23,950 through 23,952.
Thank you very much.
23,950?
Yes. So I want to talk about some of those instances, but before I do, is it standard practice in the field of handling to ask later and try to find out if information is corroborated by findings in case?
The practice that I practice is, I don't want to know a lot, for reasons we'll talk about. And, I do my work with the dog, give the information of what I'm getting or not getting from that animal, and later request that if they receive any information to provide that to me at a later date.
Okay. So you'll you'll follow up after your dog's indicated. You avoid the information up front, but afterwards you'll follow up to see if your dog was successful.
Correct.
Is that part of how handlers assess reliability in the field?
I look at it as a way for I want to know where my dogs are doing well and not doing well. So the example I would give is if I went into a house and my dog started providing its trained final response all over the house, and then they later find the person alive and well, that's really concerning to me. So I would probably remove that dog from the field in that nature of work.
Okay.
So I'm being careful with the term reliability
Sure.
in the field.
So you want to know if your dog messes up because someone could get in trouble when they shouldn't.
Yes.
And you also want to know if, for example, someone confesses later and then you learn there were actually human remains where they indicated.
Production leading.
That was leading. You can get to that a different way, I think.
Sure. Is it also helpful information to know when there's a witness or a confession as to the location of remains where an indication has been?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some examples of Biddy in the field. I want to start with the actual bodies she's located so that the jury can get a sense for how that looks. Was there a case in January of 2009 where there was a missing duck hunter and she did a water search?
Yes.
Can you explain that to the jury, please?
On that case, I was actually requested to travel to.
Hold on a second. Your objection?
Objection relevance. This is not generally relied upon in the field. Reliability is not based on things that happen in the field, so this is not relevant.
This is a way for the jury to assess how good a job the dog did. So it's appropriate and it's relevant. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. So we were talking about January 2009, a missing duck hunter and Molly's search.
Yes, I was requested to travel to Pennsylvania, and a young man had perished during a duck hunting accident in a waterway, a tributary of the Delaware River. Molly and I conducted a water search on a boat, and she provided her trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains in a specific area in the waterway, and a side scan sonar operator who I've worked with in the past utilized that information to conduct a water search with the sonar and located the young man's body.
Now, in the January 2009 duck hunter case, there's also a second body that no one was aware of that Molly assisted with?
During that search,
Objection leading.
That's not leading. That's changing to a different topic in this area, so it's fine.
during that search, because the Delaware has tides coming in and going out, the area where the boat accident occurred was up a tributary. So for 12 hours, water was traveling up, and for 12 hours, it was traveling back down. So in an effort to be as helpful as possible, I did a lot of water searching away from the area of the accident and at the mouth of the Delaware River, where the tributary went in. Molly began to provide her trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains out in the water near some pylons. It didn't make sense because the boat accident occurred so far away, about a mile away. And I gave the information to the folks searching for his remains and learned later I think I was there in January, in the spring, a body was recovered in that area who had been most likely a suicide.
So does water carry the
All
odor?
right, if I may, objection that what she's just testified to would have required hearsay. We've never been discovered this information. It's brand new to us. It's a due process confrontation right to counsel issue.
All right, has this been provided to the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. You want a copy?
I don't need a copy. Do you have a discovery number for?
Yes, 23-950, Your Honor.
All right, you're overruled.
And there's an additional document as to
950.
23-950. And as the court recalls, after defense filed the motion, I actually provided an additional document to give the case numbers, et cetera, so that counsel had that as well.
All right, thank you.
So now I'm gonna ask you a follow-up question. So does waterways carry the odor of human remains?
Your Honor, I'm looking at it. It does not mention Delaware unless that's someplace in Wisconsin.
You want to show him what you've got?
So, Judge, yes.
Or show me, I don't.
Sure.
Mr.
What
McCrory,
page are you showing me? Paragraph talks about Pennsylvania. It talks about a second body being found.
geography was one of my strong suits. Pennsylvania and Delaware are two different places.
All right.
This was the problem that we had with what was provided. We called Delaware, or we called Pennsylvania.
Judge, may I proceed with my direct examination?
Well, could you explain the difference, and maybe I missed it because I was trying to look something up, anticipating objections, which I probably shouldn't have been doing, but why the discrepancy between Pennsylvania and Delaware?
The Delaware River.
Oh, thank you. In Pennsylvania? You did say you were called to Pennsylvania on that case, didn't you?
Yeah,
All right.
Philadelphia.
All right.
I'm not good at geography.
Your objection's overruled.
Thank you, Judge. All right. So, Ms. Gumman, also, in October of 2012, was there another example of work that K-9 Molly did where she sniffed a vehicle and later a body was located in another county?
I believe that was City of Eau Claire. They had a missing person. They initially had Molly and I sniff a vehicle that she did indicate that provided a trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains. And during that search effort, we were taken to another county and did a sniff where she, again, provided her trained final response, and they recovered the body buried in the location of her trained final response.
Did they later learn from a confession why the vehicle was important to the case?
Objection, you say?
It's the same ruling I've made before. Overruled.
I learned later that they did get information, co-conspirator and the confession that the body had been transported in the vehicle that K-9 Molly provided her trained final response to.
And then as one final case example of body recovery, was there a January of 2013 search by Molly on a frozen lake where she indicated on the lake and then later sonar was used?
The city of Madison, we had a missing adult male and video footage of him leaving a hotel near one of our lakes in the winter. We began a search effort for him with the horses, the dogs, and I ended up putting quite a bit of time into searching the frozen lake behind the hotel. Molly did provide her trained final response in a very focused area about a half-mile out on the lake. Those were marked by a GPS given to another individual who operates underwater camera and side scan sonar. And in the spring, he went to that location with his equipment, and about 30 feet down, about 90 feet out, he ended up capturing video of the deceased person, consistent with the area of K-9 Molly's indication, trained final response.
So that body was recovered 30 feet under the frozen lake?
In the spring, when the water melted, is when they did the actual recovery.
Okay. You talked about also a very important point that Molly can't go into a house and indicate, and then you wouldn't want to find out later that someone was alive, for example, right?
Correct.
So are there examples on search and rescue? I want to ask you a few where Molly went into the house, cleared it, and the person was found to be all right.
I've had occasions where she and I were utilized to conduct a sniff in a house where she did not provide her trained final response.
Let me direct your attention to August of 2011 with a missing 7-year-old boy. Can you tell the jury about that case?
That was in the city of Madison, and we had a report that he was missing and his 16-year-old brother was supposed to be watching him. I got called in the wee hours of the morning to respond and initially conduct a trail with my patrol dog. And then we utilized Molly in the house, and she did not indicate to a large source of human remains odor. And the young boy the next morning was found having gone to the neighbor's house and was alive and well.
Is there another case in June of 2012 involving a pole barn and information that there might be a body buried?
In that particular case, it was in Douglas County, northern Wisconsin. The agency called and asked if I would come up and assist them in a search. They had received a tip from that a woman claimed while she was intoxicated in a bar that she had killed a man and buried him in a pole barn, not far from where she had lived at the time. So it was arranged. I got up to the area, and we were asked to search this pole barn and the other outbuildings that were at the property. We searched it all. She never provided her trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains. And I reported that to the department investigating. They then went to the owners of the property to explain why the dog was there. And the owners of the property said there had not been a pole barn on that property even at the time of the incident.
And then finally, I want to draw your attention to March of 2014. Was Molly used related to a missing teenage female and sniffing the boyfriend's vehicle?
The city of Madison, again, asked me to come in and conduct a sniff simply of a young woman that was missing in her boyfriend's car. It had gotten to be kind of standard protocol for us to utilize the human remains detection dog in those situations. She sniffed the car, did not indicate to a large source of human remains odor. And obviously that was reported to the investigator, and the young woman was found alive and well, and the boyfriend's car had nothing to do with it.
So is it fair to say that Molly doesn't indicate on every residence or every car that she searches?
That is correct.
Finally, I want to ask you about, were there cases where K-9 Molly indicated and no actual human remains were located, but later information was received that human remains had been there and then moved?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to draw your attention to October of 2010 in a strangulation case. Do you recall what case I'm talking about?
The
Crawford County
Yes.
Sheriff's?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury about that case, please?
I received a call from the Crawford County Sheriff's Department that a young man had come in and confessed that he had strangled and disposed of his girlfriend 4 years earlier. She had been reported missing and has never been located. They asked me if I could go into the apartment where he reported that this all had occurred, and with the human remains detection dog indicate. I explained that I didn't know if 4 years after the fact, if that would be relevant or capable or not, but I would certainly check. I asked him not to tell me anything beyond the very basic. I did a mutual aid through my own department, traveled down there, and Molly was taken off leave, asked to search through the apartment, and she provided 3 trained final responses that she detected the odor of human remains in the apartment. One was in a closet, one was in the living room, and one was in a bedroom. You could not see anything. And after I was completely done, they provided me a hand-drawn map by the young man, and there were 3 X's where the 3 indications had occurred.
Those locations that he had told them the body had been.
Yes.
Was there another case in October of 2012 with a basement and a staircase leading up to the first floor, and then a freezer in the corner of the basement as well?
I believe that was for the Dane County Sheriff's Department, which is the county around my city in Wisconsin. They had a missing disabled adult male, and his older brother was supposed to be caring for him. A period of time passed and they couldn't find him. I was asked to go with investigators with Canine Molly, and they asked for consent for Molly and I to sniff the interior of a home. Molly provided her trained final response on a basement staircase 1 step, and in a far corner of the basement where nothing was, there was no objects there. I was later told by the investigating detective that the brother that was supposed to care for the young man did confess, took them to where the body had been buried in the woods. And he said that he had stored his brother's body in a freezer in the basement in the corner where Canine Molly had indicated, and had transported the body up and down the staircase.
And then finally, in November of 2013, was there another case where someone gave away a deep freezer and you were asked to do a search?
Yes, that was City of Fond du Lac, which is another area in our state. Man was missing, and his wife did not know or would not give where she knew he was or wasn't. The initial information was the wife suddenly sold the deep freezer of theirs. So the police asked if Canine Molly and I would sniff the freezer if they were to retrieve it back. It was brought on a flatbed trailer in a parking lot, and Molly was off lead and provided her trained final response to the odor of human remains at the freezer. We were later involved in further searching at the home, and the wife eventually confessed, and that she had shot her husband while he was in the shower and had stored the body in the freezer for a period of time until she took the body and disposed of it.
Are these just some examples of the work that Molly's done out in the field?
Yes.
Is it fair to say there are different areas and surfaces involved, anything from waterways to freezers, tarps, vehicles, houses, things like that?
Yes.
She's worked in all these different settings?
In many different settings she has worked.
What's the longest time that's passed from the time that the human remains were present and Molly was able to give you information that there had been human remains there?
The Crawford County case was 4 years after the body had been removed in an apartment that she was able to, that particular case, provide her trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains.
So in this case, you did your work in August of 2013 and February of 2014. Does that sound right?
In reference to this case,
Yes.
yes.
And Dylan Redwine, are you aware, went missing in November of 2012?
I knew that my involvement was quite a bit of time after he went missing.
So several months later, even a year, based on what Molly's done before, as well as training, et cetera, is she capable of detecting the odor of human remains that length of time out?
Objection, meeting.
It's already been testified to, I believe, anyway. So I'm going to sustain the leading nature. You can ask it a different way if you want.
Okay. When you were asked to respond to Colorado in August of 2013 and again in February 2014, did you feel that this was work that Molly was capable of doing?
Yes.
Okay. And is Molly capable of doing that work only if biological matter is left behind, or is this an odor that she can detect whether there's biological matter or not?
We would, Molly was trained to detect the odor of human remains. Whether there's still remains there or not, that is what she's trained to detect.
That same odor, whether the remains are there or whether the remains have been removed?
It's possible that she could indicate once human remains are removed. Yes.
Like in Crawford County?
Yes.
Let me talk through a few principles with you before you get to your work in this case, just so that the jury understands the concepts as we move through that work. So there was some reference early on in your testimony to human remains detection canines versus cadaver dogs, right?
Yes.
What do human remains detection canines actually locate?
I'm going to back up one step. When we're alive, we all have distinct odor. That is what a scent-specific trailing dog follows, the cloud that you leave behind. When human beings pass into biological death, you immediately begin to decompose. But
I'm going to object. This is non-responsive.
I think it is responsive. She's trying to explain what her answer is going to be to the question. And I think if it's non-responsive, I think, well, it doesn't matter. It's okay.
Thank you. You're describing the odor.
when we pass into biological death, we become generic human cadaver odor. What that means is, if we were all down, deceased in this room for a week, Molly would have come in and simply indicated to any of the decomposing bodies, she would not recognize my odor because it's generic. My specific odor, after a period of time, goes away. Therefore, cadaver dogs can provide their trained final response to the odor of human remains, but it is not specific to any one person.
So it's the unique odor that is emitted at death.
It's generic human remains odor at
Okay.
death.
What kinds of things constitute human remains?
Well, you have fresh decomposition to skeletal remains.
Okay. What about like a large amount of blood? Would that be human remains potentially?
When human blood hits the air, it will immediately begin to decompose, and a human remains detection dog may provide its trained final response to that odor, but the dog cannot provide information as to whether the blood is from a live person or a deceased person.
Okay. Now, what's to stop Molly from just indicating on like skin cells that I drop or a hair that I drop off my head?
That's a good question. Well, I do train with large amounts of human hair, but I don't do a strand of hair. So that threshold to indication for her to search and look for one strand of hair, although it wouldn't be wrong if she indicated, it was not something I trained her to do because it could cause information in a house that is not useful to the investigation.
Right. So you trained her with large sources of actual human remains so that, well, let me ask a different question. If she would indicate on a hair or skin cells, would she be of any use in the work that you do?
Based on my wanting to simply provide information when we sniff with the dogs, that would not be of any benefit to anybody.
Right.
Someone could be completely uninvolved in something and the dog would come in and suddenly indicate in their bathroom. And that was something I had trained to a small amount with Cleo and found it was not helpful.
And you're talking about blood with Cleo?
Yeah, a little bit of blood, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Although it's interesting and fascinating, it was not helpful to an investigation one way or the other. So with Molly, I purposely tried to train her
had some period of time pass prior to Molly doing her work?
In cases, yes.
Okay. And then that's talking about residual odor. Is there also examples out there of canines finding very old bones, things like that?
Yes. There has been recent work utilizing human remains detection dogs to find historic sites in other countries. So the dogs are trained for helping assist in locating graves from hundreds, if not thousands of years ago.
And they'll find those bones underground.
From what I've read, there has been some success with the dogs.
Okay. A couple
Section move to strike.
Again, it's the same ruling based upon our expertise as a trainer, the underlying principles. But I'd like you to move off this topic, if you would, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, Your Honor. So, two more other topics I just want to touch on very briefly. Consent be transferred, like for example, consent be transferred if someone's handling a human remains and then touches something, for example. Can that scent carry over?
Yes, and I know that based off of my own experience, having placed remains out and then gone and opened a door with the glove still on, and a dog team comes in and provides its trained final response at the door handle. Not wrong, but I didn't mean to set it up that way.
But their noses can be that sensitive.
Yes.
And then finally, with rewarding, with regard to your dog, do you reward Molly only when she has a trained final response, or is your reward system different?
So we're going to talk a little bit about philosophies in dog training and handling. Because cadaver dog work is a lot of elimination work, often we search for days with nothing being found. I chose to train and work with my dogs and train other teams that work under me and with me, that I want the dog to work for a period of time, whether that dog gives me its trained final response or if that dog gives me nothing. I still give the dog its reward toy so the dog knows you did a good job today, and you don't have to make up a trained final response in order to get that thing you love the most, your reward toy. So that is just a practice that I've been doing for a long time with both narcotic dogs and cadaver dogs.
Is that characterized as rewarding the work, not the result?
I look at it as I want to set that dog up to know all day long, we're good. If you don't have anything, I'm happy with you. And the only way I can do that is to continually play with them. Now that reward is not over the top, super excited. The best example I can give is if I'm called to sniff a car for narcotics with my patrol dog, I would do 2 circles around, and if the dog didn't indicate, meaning the dog didn't have odor, I would step away and then hand the dog its toy and say, good boy, and put him up in the car. And I just feel, based off of a lot of reward-based training, if I don't indicate or if I don't reward throughout a training and or search day, it gets confusing for the dog. And pretty soon, the dog might start to think it's extinction training, which means I'm trying to undo something. But also, for me personally, I feel that it makes us a more honest team.
And then finally, are you aware of the concept of cueing?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what is cueing?
So cueing is if there's a lot of different concepts out there, but basically it started with Hans Cleaver was a horse person in the 1800s who claimed that he had taught his horse how to count. And that was not exactly what was going on. It was like a parlor trick. So the horse would scrape 5 or 6 times, and then whatever he did to cue it, that's your count.
What is cueing itself? Is
Okay. So cueing would be, as a handler, if I keep the dog in the area for a long period of time, or there's one thing to present detailing, but it's another thing almost to prompt the dog into a trained final response is the best example I can give.
So the dog responding to a signal from the handler as opposed to an actual odor.
Yes, so it might be, I know the source is by that Kleenex box, and so I let my dog go, and the dog goes over and keeps going, but I stand still right in front of it. And some of it is subconscious, and some of it is conscious cueing by handlers. Always a big concern in the field of detection work.
Okay. Are you aware of the Lisa Litt studies that talk about cueing?
Yes.
Generally speaking, what are they about?
So Lisa Litt's research, I believe it came out in about 2007, and it had explosive and narcotics dog handlers, and they did an experiment, and they told them you're going to go into spaces where there's your target odor. And so handlers went in and did a horrible job, and the dogs gave a lot of what we call false indications, meaning there's no source there, so you should not be hitting. And as a result of that research, a lot of good ideas came from it in terms of our handlers going in with preconceived ideas that could cause false indications, up to whoever's doing the evaluating, if they're standing close or giving a secondary behavior of their own that would cause the dog to inadvertently provide a trained final response.
So are there things that you do in your practice as a handler to avoid cueing?
As a result of that research and just for my own person, I do some things that I feel are more beneficial in their general practices. So, and it's evolved over time with just the experience of being in the field doing this work. One of the things that I always ask is, if I'm the handler going to do a search, I don't want to know a lot. I mean, I need to know some basic information, but I don't want to know a lot. I also try to do as much off-lead searching as I can. There are occasions where I have to have the dog on a leash for safety reasons. And sort of my philosophy is, if my dog is off-lead and gives its trained final response, then and only then will I get involved with what we refer to as detailing. And probably the best way you're knowledgeable of that is a narcotics dog handler goes up to a vehicle, and you see the handler and the dog move through the space, and the handler's hand is actually directing the dog's nose. And it's areas of odor opportunity. So a vertical scene, so that we're getting that dog slowed down a little bit in detailing. I try as much as possible for the dog to work off lead. And then I also have parameters of time in my mind. So if I were to come into this space and search on a case where the police think there was foul play and there might have been a body in there, I would take the dog off lead, let her work, and after a period of, a space like this, and again, I'm looking just to tell them if the odor of human remains, a large source of human remains is present. I'm not looking for drops of blood. I don't feel that's my job as a handler. I would, in my mind, sweep through one way, sweep through another, meaning she would be off lead and I would move through the area. In my mind, I'm thinking of, has her nose been everywhere it can be? And within 5 minutes or 3 minutes, if she's not showing some interest in a space, we're out the door. And what I say to law enforcement is, my dog is not indicating that she has the odor of human remains.
So off leash or off lead, You have minimal facts going in as to particular areas, for example, and then you're not going to let your dog stay in there forever until there's an indication. You're going to let your dog clear the room, get out.
Correct. I would rather miss than get a false alert.
In addition to that, do you keep other people out of the way as your dog's working?
So another concern that is always being explored is, did the law enforcement that came into the space inadvertently cue me to cue the dog? I think that's a good way to put it. So one of the things I say, first of all, we try to train with other people around, so the dog is used to people moving through a space because you can't help it. But I'll often say, can you just stay out of the way? And I'll be honest, I don't pay a lot of attention while I'm physically working an area where anybody is at. But I do ask that they stay out of the way.
Okay. And then finally, the certification process that these national agencies do with your dog, does that account for cueing to make sure that your dog's actually able to be accurate?
As a certifying official, the best way I can describe it is I just really want that handler to legitimately work the area and tell me if they have odor or not and where it is. So what I'll do is I'll have traffic cones identifying the area, and I usually give them a description of, you see your parameters, and then go search, and I'll stay out of the area. I may bring a folding chair and sit down, but I just want to stay out of the area because I don't want to influence anything, and inadvertently I might, just by standing in a spot randomly.
And then the handler going into a certification process doesn't know where the items are.
It's single blind, so they don't know where it's at.
Let's segue to the work on this case. So were you contacted by investigators to come out and do some searches in the Dylan Redwine disappearance?
I don't recall how I initially got involved. I believe that Gene and Sandy Ralston are site scan sonar individuals who I've done a lot of work with around the United States. And Gene and Sandy were contacted about a waterway near to where Dylan went missing. I'm going to say this wrong, Vallecino Lake? Vallecito Lake. I think that's where it was.
Okay.
So Gene had originally asked me to get involved. I was unavailable, so I had another team go work the water.
Did you come out here to do specific tasks in August of 2013 with regard to searches related to the case?
Yes.
Okay. And did you travel from Wisconsin to Durango?
Yes, we flew here.
Are you paid for your efforts, or is it a volunteer capacity?
I've always volunteered my services for searching.
So are you paid costs for your travel, et cetera?
I do ask that my travel costs be covered by whoever the agency is, because otherwise I wouldn't have a house.
But other than that, you do it on a volunteer capacity when you came here?
Yes.
What's the process regarding the facts that you're going to have going into searches?
You know, every situation is a little bit different.
Let me ask you, I'll be a little more direct so we can move through this introductory part. So are you sometimes brought to like a briefing that has some general information about a case, something like that?
Yes.
And then as you're receiving information about a case, do you ever allow investigators to tell you locations where physical evidence has been located, for example?
I would not want to know that information just based off of my general practices.
Your general practice is to specifically avoid knowing, like, let's use the example where blood evidence was located.
I would not want to know that.
Or where another handler had worked the dog. Would you want to know that?
That I wouldn't want to know either, because I don't know anything about the other dog.
Okay. So when you came to Durango to do this work, did you know generally that there was a missing child?
I did.
And did you know generally that that missing child had last been seen with his father at his father's house?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know anything about the processing of the house itself by law enforcement or anything like that?
I don't recall that was several years ago. What specifically I knew at the beginning. So I'll have to say I don't recall.
Would that maybe be a better question for the investigators themselves?
Yes,
You do write reports in your cases, right?
I do document all my work.
And when you document, do you document the findings that Molly has in any given case?
Every case that I do, I write what I refer to as similar to a police report, where it provides who called, the general information, and any outcome, whether it was we searched and got nothing, or we searched and this is what we got.
Okay. So when you came here, did you know whether you were going to be finding evidence of human remains odor, or whether you were going to be clearing a house of no evidence of human remains odor?
From what I recall, one of the reasons we were coming out was to conduct further searching for human remains on a mountain side where some remains had been found.
Okay.
And then as I met the investigators, I always try to provide them with Cadaver 101, Human Remains Detection Dog 101, so they can make a decision on what information they would want to explore with the tool, the dog.
So you knew there were going to be remains on the mountainside generally. Did you know the locations exact of those remains when you did your work?
I don't recall. When we went out there, I knew that some remains had been recovered. I was under the impression that we were there to see if we could find additional remains. From what I recall, they gave an area and said this is where some of it's been found.
Okay. And with regard to the house itself, did you, is there something called elimination that you could potentially be doing at someone's home?
As a general practice, if someone goes missing, the dogs are useful in trying to identify where anything happened or didn't happen. So that would have been explained to them that the dog could be utilized to sniff vehicles, cars, houses, businesses, any area that to help eliminate, because that's good information for an investigation.
So when you go in, do you go into the preconceived notion of whether you're going to be finding evidence or eliminating an area?
I've learned not to have any expectations of what will or will not happen during a search.
So let's start with August 5th of 2013. Were you asked to search some clothing with Molly?
Yes.
Okay, what were you asked to search?
I was told that the investigators had collected clothing from Dylan's father, and they wanted to know if Molly could sniff the clothing for the odor of human remains.
Okay. And can you explain to the jury how that search of the clothing went?
So I spent some time trying to get basic information about how it's stored, where it's stored, but they I always want to do it in a clean area. So the first thing we did was we went to an outbuilding that had concrete floors, and I went in there and let Molly off lead and gave her a command to search for the odor of human remains and moved her through that space to make sure there wasn't something that she indicated to that had nothing to do with the case. She did not indicate, and then I put her back up and they brought in 3 bags.
Okay, so that first part, is that basically to clear the room?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that there's not odor of human remains that's correct, but unrelated to the investigation.
Okay. After you cleared the room, how many bags of clothes did they bring in?
They initially, they brought in 3 bags of clothes and they set the 3 bags out. I didn't know what was in the bags. They were spaced apart. And I brought Molly in and took her off traffic lead and said, go find. And I just stood back and she went and moved through the space. And she provided a trained final response to a bag within a couple of moments of being in the space of those 3 bags.
So, Judge, could I approach the exhibits?
You may.
Thanks.
They were, brown bags. Yeah.
K-9 indicated on, if any.
Initially, she indicated that first run through off lead, she indicated to one bag. I moved her away, did my usual reward calmly, gave her a second, took the toy away, and then put her back to work, wanting to just observe if she could sniff the other two bags. So she went over and she did indicate on a second bag, providing her trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains. She sat, and I did the same thing, moved her away, gave her a toy for a moment, just telling her she's a good girl for working, took the toy away, and then sent her a third time. And the third bag, she went up to it, she dropped her nose, she sniffed, she turned around and looked at me, and she kept walking. She did not indicate to that final of the three bags.
So trained final response on 2 out of 3 evidence bags.
Yes,
Then were the items taken out of the bags for further work?
I don't know why I asked, but I said, is there more than one object in that bag? The third one that she sniffed at and looked at me and then walked away. So they removed the items out of the 3 bags, and I had put her up, brought her back out, and they asked me to re-sniff the items while they were outside the bag.
Okay. And we talked about a lot of this, but is this work done off lead?
I do it all off lead.
Okay. Investigators, are they allowed anywhere near hovering by the items, or are they backing away?
It's a general practice, and that was a while ago. I would have asked for them to just back away from the area. So she had free reign, and for the reasons that we talked about, not wanting to have any misunderstood behaviors by anybody.
And let me just clarify this. When you say your general practice, are you consistent with your general practice? So if, for example, you find yourself testifying in court, you know you do it the same way each time?
I do it twofold. One is so that you can be pretty nervous, or you just need to have a general practice that you do each and every time you go to a case, so that it is investigated the same.
So what items were taken out, do you recall, were taken out of the bags?
One of the bags had 2 white tennis shoes, a left and right. One bag had a pair of blue jeans, and one bag had a blue long sleeve shirt and a green t-shirt.
Which is the bag that did not have a trained final response by Molly?
The bag with the 2 items, the blue shirt and the green t-shirt.
Okay. Did you then have Molly search the 4 individual items outside of the bags?
The shoes being one item, yes.
The shoes being one item, the pants being one item, and then the 2 shirts separate.
Yes.
May I approach the exhibits, Your Honor?
Yes.
Those 2 bags, and then there's a blue shirt and a green t-shirt.
And then this looks like the items in the third bag.
Yes.
So the first 2 items I held up, the pants and the shoes, Molly had indicated trained final response, odor of human remains on the exterior of the items.
Ask and answer leading.
Yeah, but I think he's trying to set this up, so I think it's okay. Go ahead.
Do I have the correct items for trained final response?
When they were in the bag, she indicated on that bag with what turned out to be tennis shoes, and that bag, which turned out to be blue jeans.
And then she searched all 4 of these items individually, including these.
Yes, those 2 items were then, everything was set out, and those 2 items were with the bags that came in on the ground.
When Molly did the follow-up search with the items out of the bag, what trained final responses did she give, if any?
She indicated on the shoes again, providing her trained final response of a SIP that she detected the odor of human remains. She did the same thing on the blue jeans. And then she went up off lead and indicated she sniffed the blue shirt. She provided her trained final response of a SIP that she detected the odor of it, and then moved away. I don't recall how it was determined, but I asked if they would move the blue shirt out of the vicinity, and I resent her again, and she went up to the green shirt and where the blue shirt had been. She put her nose to the green shirt, and then went over to where the blue shirt had just been removed and provided a trained final response that she detected the odor of that. So she did not indicate to the green t-shirt.
So in summary of the 4 items, Molly had a trained final response for the shoes, the pants, and the outer shirt, but not the green shirt.
Assuming that the blue shirt was worn on the outside, yes.
And Judge, if I could publish previously admitted people's 204, 207, 214, and then 212.
You may.
Thank you. So I'm going to put the items up on the screen if that helps, because we've got them all bagged in evidence down here. Are these the shoes for the trained final response, as you recall?
That is the pair of shoes, or the bag and the shoes that Molly provided a trained final response to the odor of human remains.
And then 207? Does that look consistent with the pants that are in the evidence bag, et cetera?
Yes.
Okay. And then 214, this is going to be the shirt that you, well, tell the jury.
The blue shirt, when it was outside of the bag, Molly provided her trained final response of a SID indication that she detected the odor of human remains to the blue shirt.
Okay. And then 212, please. This T-shirt, is this the green shirt you're referring to?
The green T-shirt, Molly did not provide her trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains on it.
So I understand you don't want to assume which shirt was worn on the outside and which was worn on the underneath, but it's the T-shirt that Molly never trained final response on. It was the long sleeve outer style shirt that had the trained final response.
That is correct.
After you tested the clothing, did you have occasion to walk through the impound lot at the police department or at the sheriff's office?
The building we were at was in a fenced-in area, and when we were exiting after finishing this part of the work, the investigators asked if they could do a little experiment with the dog.
What experiment did they have in mind?
They asked me if I'd be willing to have Molly off lead and sniff, like, I don't know, half a dozen cars, maybe there was more, that were all sporadically, but some consistency, placed in that, I'm assuming, impound area.
Objection, Your Honor, and perhaps we approach on this.
Sure.
It's just going to take me a minute to find that citation for counsel, so.
And that's fine. Should we take like 2 short breaks, part of it while you're doing this, and then?
That's fine, Judge.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Let's try and start up in 10 minutes. So at 20 till, remember my admonitions. Everybody rise for the jury? And Cindy, just have them outside. Okay?
Actually, Judge, I think I found it.
Okay, well.
We're already headed in the break direction.
All right, show it.
Sure, happy to do it. $24,530.
We'll start up in 10 minutes. You can just tell me.
$24,537 in discovery.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Correct. There's also one by Moose Goldbright. No, it's Discovery 24550. I think it's going to be 1001. Yeah, 1001. The sub number for time. John, I don't know if Justin told you, but there's a second citation for sub 1001, that's another report on the exact same subject, and that's discovery 24550.
May I rise for the jury, please? Okay, please be seated. Can we get your witness in here? You don't have to run, it's okay. You can if you want to. Raise your, oh, you don't, you're already sworn in. You're still under oath. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so Ms. Gutman, we were talking about walking through the sheriff's impound lot. You recall that?
Yeah.
And someone had an idea about running Molly through a test.
Yes,
And you had testified there were at least 6 cars, possibly more.
yes.
Right. And what was the idea going into this situation?
Because human remains detection dogs is kind of unknown, I think they were curious to see if she could even do what I was claiming she could do. So they just asked me, could you sniff these vehicles and tell us, would she be able to detect if there had been a body there and remove the vehicles in the impound?
Okay. So the idea was La Plata County Sheriff's Office impound lot, they know which vehicles there have been bodies in, and they asked you to run Molly on.
Yes.
Okay. Did you know which vehicles had had bodies in them?
No.
Did you, in fact, allow Molly to search the vehicles in the impound lot?
Because they asked, I took her off her traffic lead and sent her with her command to search for the odor of human remains. And she ended up off lead away from me, indicating on 2 vehicles to the odor of human remains.
And so at all the vehicles in the impound lot, 2 of them, she indicates train final response on.
Yes,
At the time, did you know the significance of those 2 vehicles or whether or not she was accurate?
I did not know anything doing it. And then afterwards, one of the investigators did.
Objection is going to be all hearsay.
I agree, Judge, actually. I'm going to stop her there.
All right.
And as you testified before, you tend to collect information after the work, right?
Yes,
Okay. I'll let the investigators testify as to that separately. But they made you aware of whether Molly was accurate or not, and then you went on with further search efforts.
yes.
Thank you. So at this time, in that same day of August 5th, 2013, were you going to search Mark Redwine's residence?
They asked me if I would be willing to have Molly search outside of Mr. Redwine's residence.
Okay. And generally speaking, we talked a little bit about the information you had going in, but it would have been that there's a missing child, and you would have at least known that he had been seen at that house last.
I think what I knew was that there was video that Dylan had arrived at the airport and he had been at Walmart. I don't recall how anyone knew if he had been at his father's house last.
Okay. And you were going to search the exterior first of his father's house?
Yes.
Did you have a search warrant or consent to do that?
The La Plata County Sheriff investigators made a phone call to Mr. Redwine and asked him by phone if a dog could sniff around his house on the outside.
And did he give consent for that?
I heard a male voice say yes.
Okay. Now, what did you do in terms of, did you drive over there with investigators?
I believe we had a rental vehicle, the other handler and I, so we drove there separate, but in a caravan.
Okay. At this time, Judge, can I publish People's 24 previously admitted?
Yes.
Does that look consistent with the residents that you did the searching work on that day?
Yes.
Okay. Then was there a driveway with a truck, a Chevy truck in there at the time that you went to the home as well?
There was a Chevy truck parked near the house.
So can you explain to the jury when you arrived at the house what you did with Molly?
When we arrived, I took her off her traffic lead and gave her a command to search for the odor of human remains and just followed behind her as she moved through. I don't know how large the property is. And we went around the house. There was some other smaller outbuildings and even an open septic system.
Okay.
On the property.
Was there like a camper trailer thing there?
You know, I recall some sort of something, either a storage container or a camper, something of that nature. That was, would be, is that the south side of the house? That direction? This is the east side?
This would be you facing the east side of the house.
Yeah, so beyond the house, out of the picture.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask you to just explain to the jury if Molly had any trained final responses on the exterior of the house, but I know it's been a long time. Did you bring your reports if you need them to refresh your memory?
I can use my reports, but I think I can recall quite a bit of what she did.
That's great. Can you explain to the jury what Molly did when you searched the exterior of Mark Redwine's residence?
Okay. She was off traffic lead, and as we began moving through the area, she provided her trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains near the garage doors, which would be on the, if I'm cardinally not challenged, it's on the east side of the house, near to the south.
Okay. What we're looking at here on the left?
Yes. She ended up providing 6 trained final response to the odor of human remains outside of the residence, by the garage, front door, under an open staircase that's on the south side, and it was just dirt.
Mm-hmm. Can you see the bottom couple of steps right there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then she went up the open staircase and provided a trained final response on a small platform, which was near an open window. She indicated there's a creek or a little body of water that runs maybe along the roadway and then tucks to the north. And at the edge of the yard, she stuck her nose down in the creek and then backed out and gave her trained final response to the odor of human remains. And then she provided a trained final response by a small shed in what I would describe as the southwest corner behind the house.
What are some reasons a dog might indicate on water? You said a creek, right?
Oh, well, one thing could be is, do you have human remains, generic human remains, in a waterway that's flowing into there? My experience has been that water bolsters odor. So if there's decomposing body on a hillside, the dogs will often indicate to the waterway that's below it just by the nature of the rain coming down and then drains down into there. So they're telling you there's odor down there.
What about like washing hands in there with something on it, things like that? Can that cause a dog to indicate on an area like that?
You mean somebody just washes their hands in a creek with soap and water?
No, with someone has human remains.
Boy, I'm going to say that based on the time when we were there, I would not say that would have caused it. It to be on the safe side, outside of the possibility of the dog indicating. Okay. I think I answered that correctly.
Sure. Were there areas of like entrance and exit to the home that were indicated, trained final response?
One of her indications was by the front door, on this side of the house.
And now you've talked about, well, let me ask about a few other areas. There was the camper trailer that we talked about. Any indications on the camper trailer?
Molly did not indicate to the odor of human remains around that or at that.
Any trained final responses on the septic area?
She did not indicate at the septic area.
And then you said there was a truck in the driveway, a Chevy, right?
Mm-hmm.
did you bring Molly to the truck to do that search as well?
The pickup truck that was there, was close to the garage door, on that southwest corner. So I don't recall if it was facing or backed in, but there was, I don't know, 6 to 10 feet between the garage and the truck. And where her first indication, train final response was, because I'm looking for just information, I worked her around the truck, off lead, and she did not indicate at the truck or on the vehicle.
Okay. So it's fair to say there were a lot of areas that Molly didn't indicate.
That's correct.
And you said you've searched houses where there's no indications at all, right?
Correct.
So what was your conclusion drawn from the train final responses at this point in time?
Based on our, my training experience with Canine Molly, there was a large amount of human remains odor present on the exterior of that property.
So what did you do next?
Explained all of that information to the agency, talked about are there other explanations for it. And then I believe they made another phone call to a male who I was told was Mr. Redwine. And they had a discussion about wanting to go inside the house with the dog.
And did they again obtain the consent to go inside the home at this point?
I did hear them obtain consent by a male voice on the phone.
Okay. When that happened, did you in fact go into the house and do a search with Molly inside the house?
Yes.
Can you explain that to the jury, please? And not the findings yet, but
okay.
Just the process that you used.
Okay. The first thing that I always like to do is put the dog away in the vehicle, and I just do a quick walkthrough, not touching anything, but I want to make sure for safety issues there's no cat running around or maybe mouse traps, anything of hazard to the dog. And then also I have a mental layout of the size of the house so that I have my clock ticking in my head of how long I want to spend in there based on earlier testimony about I don't want to spend a lot of time in there if I'm not getting anything by the dog.
Okay. So you did a walkthrough?
I did.
And then when you were done with the walkthrough, what's the process look like to work Molly through the house?
So we utilized the front door. I walked in. Law enforcement was present. I couldn't tell you where they were.
You can ask them a question like that, but if I can focus you on your search itself.
Okay. She was taken off traffic lead, given her command to search for the odor of human remains. And on the first floor, she indicated and provided her trained final response to the odor of human remains in 7 locations.
So let me, before we get into the details, did she search the downstairs and the upstairs of the home?
Yes.
And there were areas where she had trained final responses and areas where she didn't?
That is correct.
Were there entire rooms where she didn't have a trained final response?
Yes.
And then were there rooms where she had multiple trained final response?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, may I approach with People's 470 and 471?
You may.
So, Ms. Gumman, have you seen People's 470 and 471 before?
Yes.
Are they diagrams that look consistent with the layout of that house from your memory?
The diagram I looked at, I thought was different.
May I approach?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I ask what's going on?
Yeah, that's good. So I guess we'll find out now.
Judge, coaching a witness in the middle of their testimony is,
I don't believe I saw any communication going this way, Mr. Moran.
But Judge, I just wanted to look at it, and I'll take it.
All right, thank you.
So the blue on the diagrams, does that indicate locations of trained final responses based on your report and memory?
Yes. I had 7 trained final responses, and there's 6 here.
So is one missing from the diagram?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask that another witness lay the foundation for the furniture that created the diagram. So for purposes of this diagram, just the locations themselves, they look fair and accurate as to where the trained final responses were.
There is one blue that's across the room from where I recall her indicating.
Okay. Would it refresh your memory in your report to take a look at your report and take a look at the diagram as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may, there's been no testimony that there's a recollection that needs to be refreshed. She's just saying it's wrong.
Well, I think she can look and see if it's consistent with the report, which I think is what Mr. Johnson's trying to do. I don't see a problem with that. So.
Then the objection would be foundation then. If
All
it's
right, I
impeachment.
understand your objection. I don't think it's a problem. So, if you want to, do you have your report there?
I don't.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, do you want to provide?
Yes, Your Honor. May I approach?
Yes.
So, Ms. Gov,
Mr. Moran, know what discovery number you're looking at?
2734, Your Honor. So, Ms. Governor, I'm just going to ask that you review the exhibit and refresh your memory, and don't read it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if it refreshes your memory as to the locations. May I approach?
Yes.
Did that refresh your memory?
Yes.
And is there still one location missing that you could perhaps indicate with a pen on the diagram itself?
Yes.
Okay. May I approach to retrieve the exhibit, Your Honor, and
Yes.
also with the pen?
Yes. Thank you.
So, Ms. Governor, are the locations on the diagram that are there accurate?
From the best of my recollection, yes.
And then can you use that blue pen to indicate the area where one's missing? And I think you're writing on the sleeve.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Split out of
That's
the
okay. It's going to write better if you take it out of the sleeve.
You want to just initial that? I mean, it's kind of clear from my looking at it that that's what it is, but
I'd sure like to look at it.
you may. You don't want a surprise on this one, is it?
Well, Judge, it's in the report, but maybe we both approach.
It is not in the report I have.
Well, you don't need to editorialize. You can come look at it. Yeah, right. We're okay for right now.
Is the diagram People's 470 now fair and accurate as to the locations where Molly had a trained final response?
Yes.
And then 471, does that also document the trained final responses consistent with your memory and your report?
Yes.
Mayor, at this time, I move to admit People's 470 and 471 into evidence.
Okay, Mr. Moran?
Commissioner Vordier,
Go ahead.
Molly or Biddy was trained to do something called pinpointing, correct?
I think we always work to get as close to source as we can, which I use the term pinpointing. Is that what you want to know?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
What pinpointing means is that the dog is trained specifically to go where the strongest concentration of an odor is, right?
Yes.
So just most generally, if there's a body sitting here, if the dog's doing what it's trained to do, it would go to the body precisely and alert on the body, right?
Objection, this is cross-examination.
Well, it may be void here. I want to listen a little more.
What I'm getting at here is that you didn't create this exhibit, right?
I personally did not.
And you've seen multiple versions of this, right? There was another one that was provided many years ago that you've seen that furniture was in the wrong places, right?
I've seen different versions, I think.
And whoever is creating these exhibit.
Hold on. This, I think, is beyond. I mean, why do we care about who created it? It's just based on her memory. If it's accurate, it's where the spots were. That's all that really matters for the
Except that the spots are a specific location where the dog does its final trained response. And what we have here is big circles looped around areas of the room. And unless the dog is sitting 50 different times, what we have is a misleading exhibit. And that's the basis of this objection. I'm getting there with this witness. You're nodding yes, I think.
No, that's not the way I'm taking this testimony. So she has testified that it's accurate. You can get into that on cross-examination if you want to, but it doesn't go to the admissibility.
May I just ask that final question? If it was accurate.
Okay, yeah, that you can ask. So ask it again since we were talking.
Ma'am, when the dog alerted, say for instance at H in this diagram, what's been drawn there is a square that encompasses maybe a 16th of the room, right?
There is a square on H. I couldn't tell you the dimensions of the rooms to help you with that question.
Sure. Let me just say this then. The dog didn't alert in all of those locations. The dog alerted in just one location, right?
Canine Molly provided 7 trained final responses to very specific locations on that first floor that we're looking at.
And you would agree with me, this is not a specific location. This is an area of a room, right?
I think you could go either way with that. I'm sorry. Is it 2 feet by 2 feet? I don't know.
Yeah. How precise an area is the dog?
Hold on a second. So you're arguing over 4 square feet?
Yeah.
Okay, that can be done across examination. The exhibit, which one was this?
This was 470 and 471, Your Honor.
Oh, that's right, because it was first and second floor.
Yes, Your Honor.
They're both admitted.
Okay, thank you, Judge. So let me be clear too, Ms. Gumman. You're going to testify to the jury where the trained final responses were specifically, right?
To the best of my ability, I will try to pinpoint where she had odor.
And that was all indicated in your report previously from back in August of 2013 when you did the work, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is this a demonstrative type of exhibit to help the jury when they're looking over things to know the areas of the room?
I couldn't say if it's demonstrative. I think
maybe that's too much of a legal question. Does this exhibit just help the jury see what we're talking about?
that's what I would look at it as.
Okay. So I'm going to ask at this point to publish People's 470. Ms. Gumman, I do want you to be specific, and so I've got a pointer right on the end of the bench there. Yes. And there's a microphone in the back. Would you mind walking the jury through where Molly's findings were, in your own words?
Sure.
Thank you.
Your Honor, while she's moving that way, is this being admitted as a demonstrative?
Okay. Judge, this is a summary of her findings on a map that gives the general areas, and she's going to testify in detail so the jury can later refer back to it. It's been admitted, and I just asked that she be able to testify about it.
Well, she's going to.
Thank you, Judge.
But wasting time. You can pull the microphone out of the stand and just pop out. You don't have to. And you can move the stand if it's in your way, but you have to kind of stand out to the side while the jurors can see what you put your phone on. Okay? Whatever works for you is fine.
I'll just go through the locations of where she indicated, and what I mean is she provided a trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains. The first one was where the floor and the walls are at the entrance to the door inside the house. It's like a welcome mat size rug. She indicated in the corner low, and there, that's my recollection, there was a stand there. But I would say that the indication was not on the stand. It was this corner with the floor. She indicated by sticking her nose into the sofa on the seat portion of the brown couch, and provided a trained final response to the odor of human remains. she indicated, there was like a fireplace, or a wood burning stove with, a partition that came up, and she was indicating right at the corner of it, and there was also right in that same vicinity, fireplace, item. And from the best of my recollection, I couldn't determine if it was the corner of that concrete step up or where the objects were. She hit on both sides of the stairs going up. One was a speaker, and one was the banister, but it was both of them were low by the first step.
So when you pointed to the speaker, is that the area that we missed on the diagram itself, but that you've now drawn in?
Yes.
Thank you.
And then she did not indicate all these other areas her nose was in there. She did not indicate in the bathroom. And then in this spare bedroom on the floor was a black duffel bag that she indicated trained final response on that black duffel bag.
I'd like to move to People's 471, please. Does this show the areas of trained final response in the upstairs of the home?
Yes.
Can you please talk to the jury about the specifics of that?
Molly, still off leash, worked through this area on the second floor. And she provided 3 trained final response to the odor of human remains right in front of the bathroom sink, on the area right under the sink, just directly under the sink, but on the cupboard in front of the washing machine, and then on the floor in this far corner of the bedroom on the opposite side of that bath. A spot right there. She didn't indicate anywhere else upstairs.
And then those blue arrows to the left of the map, are those consistent with that area you testified before under the stairs?
Exterior indication, trained final response under an open stair too. There's
So that,
some dirt there.
so that's the staircase coming down from the master bedroom,
Yeah, yes.
but nothing in the bedroom to the right at all?
She was brought into this area and she did not provide her trained final response in this bedroom for that space.
Thank you, ma'am. If you could grab a seat. So is this, let me just ask you a general question, Ms. Gumman. Is this typical of every house that you go in, or is this notable for the odor of human remains?
It's not ever typical. I would say that I have been in scenes before where the dog gives multiple indications to the odor of human remains, trained final response. And I would say there was a large source of human remains odor there based on my experience.
Okay. In the living room itself, did you watch Molly's behavior specifically in the living room area?
I watched her everywhere that she worked.
Is that consistent with the odor of large source of human remains in the living room as well?
What it indicates to me is,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the characterization here. That's beyond previous rulings of this court as to what's admissible.
Well, I don't know about that, but why don't you started to answer the question by what does it indicate to you? So why don't you answer that question that you were starting to answer, even though that's not what you were asked?
as a general rule, if I were to come into someone's home, that there had been no large amount of human remains odor or human remains odor, I would not get that level of number of trained final responses.
Okay, thank you. And you talked about transfer of odor before, you recall that?
Yes.
So when you have this many locations, is it possible if someone's moving about within the room with either the human remains themselves or handling them that could leave indicator or leave odor in different locations?
Yes. It's definitely possible that touching a human body that's deceased or stepping around it could cause some of these trained final responses.
Did you do searches the next day up on an area called Middle Mountain Road?
Yes.
And I think you testified about this a little bit earlier, but was this August 6th of 2013?
August 6th and 7th,
Okay.
we conducted searches on Middle Mountain.
And did you go up there with a series of investigators, a group of investigators from the case?
Yes.
And what were you setting out to do on Middle Mountain Road?
My intention was simply to try to assist them in locating any other human remains in the vicinity of where some human remains have been located.
Did they take you to a trailhead?
They did.
And did they ask you to work Molly in that general area of the trailhead?
There was a discussion about what would be the optimal way to conduct any further locating of human remains. And so I started where they had recovered some stuff and purposefully pushed out to look for, as graphic as it is, animals will sometimes step in it, feed on it, and then they can carry it a short distance to feed on it again. So there might have been some other remains to be recovered.
Okay. So did you go down kind of a trail? Does that sound familiar? I know it's a long time ago.
There was a trail in the first day's effort that we did move down.
Okay. Can you just explain to the jury how you work Molly in this area?
But from my best practices would be is I actually want to allow the dog to go to the area where there has been some recovery to take out the conflict of the dog being downwind and wanting to go pursue it. So I would have allowed her to move around in that area and then start to move out. Again, I'm just simply trying to put the dog's nose in areas maybe that no one else had been, and or if something had been moved around that we might be able to locate.
Okay. And how did you work her off leash?
She was off lead.
Okay. And did you have any GPS coordinates or anything like that when you went into it, or you were looking at an area you were going to search? I carry a GPS, and if and when a dog gives me out in the woods or side of a mountain, trained final response that they detect the odor of human remains, I step up to where the dog's indicating and I push a GPS mark and say to whoever's there, I'm getting something right in this vicinity. I don't usually look for it. I keep moving because my job is done. Someone else can rake or sift or whatever they want to do. Okay. And your understanding going in was this area had previously been searched and items had been gathered, collected, etc.
That's my understanding.
Did you work Molly off leash and get trained final responses on that hillside and Middle Mountain Road?
I did.
And did that include both the 6th and the 7th of 2013?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to approach with People's 520, please.
All right.
So, Ms. Gumman, I've handed you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 520. Have you seen that map before?
Yes.
Now, there are yellow markers that were previously introduced through an exhibit, People's 470. And then there are additional markings on there. Are they in blue?
They're blue.
Okay. Those blue markings, well, let me start here. In terms of the yellow markings, is that anything you observed or something that is just part of the map?
That's part of the map. There wasn't anything there when I was there.
Okay. And like I said, that's People's Exhibit 470 introduced that information. Now on that, you've included here, are those accurate to your GPS coordinates in the blue marks to give context to that same area of the mountain?
My GPS marks were then transferred to my report. And so these are the GPS coordinates.
So like in your report, you list the latitude and longitude
Yes.
type of coordinates?
Yep.
And then those are placed onto that map 520?
Yes.
Is it fair and accurate of the places where Molly had trained final responses?
So that's my recollection, and based off of the recreation of the GPS coordinates.
Move to admit 520 into evidence, Your Honor.
Mr. Moran?
I have GPS coordinates associated with this day. This document was provided to me today, so I have not been able to independently verify it.
Judge,
It looks similar.
I need to clarify.
All right.
So I gave Mr. Moran this last week. The court will remember the conversation perhaps, but I emailed this to him in advance last week so he'd have the weekend with it. This is simply the printed copy with the exhibit sticker. So if he had looked at that, he would have reviewed it, and that's the same document. Hopefully that's helpful.
All right. Any other objections?
Yeah, that is helpful. I've looked at so many of these that they're blending, but we're making our own, so no objections.
All right. 520 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. So with regard to 520, may I publish, Judge?
You may.
Is this the same document you have?
Yes. Just needs to be slid over a little.
Let me see.
Oh, you're good.
I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Can you just explain to the jury the work that Molly did out there on Middle Mountain Road over the course of those 2 days, please?
Those are the GPS coordinates that I recorded where she gave her trained final response to the odor of human remains. That's done over 2 days.
Okay. And is it a total of 12 times that she indicated?
Yes.
Right. And then did you find any yourself, any human remains actually out there?
I did not.
Now, may I approach the pointer, Judge?
You may.
Now, I know you're assuming some of these that another witness has laid foundation for in yellow, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But let's work it with a scenario. I'll give you a hypothetical. Let's say that a human remains a body put somewhere in this general area, and about 9 months of scavenging, weather, water, snow, rain, all that had occurred. And let's assume that these are actual locations where human remains or items from an individual were located. Working under that assumption, does this make sense that Molly would have trained final responses in these types of areas?
Yes, because her indications were, for all intents and purposes, downhill. So drainage would have caused some odor to travel down and or critters.
So if a body had been torn apart somewhere in here and dispersed in the general pattern you're seeing here, and then if snow had melted and water had run, you might expect to see human remains odors in these types of areas.
That's correct.
That's something that you've seen in the field before.
Yes.
Thank you. Finally, want to draw your attention to February 13th of 2014. Did you return to the Durango area? I guess that would have been about 6 months later.
Yes.
And were you going to do another search based on a search warrant for a Dodge truck?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the jury where that was to occur and what was going to happen?
It was a vehicle, and my understanding is it was a Dodge pickup that was owned by Mr. Redwine, and the Plata County Sheriff's Department investigators wanted to see or have Molly sniff the exterior and or interior of that vehicle for the odor of human remains.
Where was that done? Do you recall?
It was at their same facility that we did the other, sniff of clothing.
Any concerns about having the clothing there and then having the truck there, or do you take precautions related to that?
I don't recall on that one, I don't recall if I actually had her search through the whole space again. I do know that the vehicle was not in the same vicinity in that big building as where the other part had been done, because we would have discussed that.
So we're talking about a big warehouse.
Yeah.
And then, did you take precautions for queuing going into a situation like this, doing this work?
Yes, my usual, took her off traffic lead and gave her a command to search for the odor of human remains.
Did everyone else stand back out of the way kind of thing?
Yes.
All right. So what did that search, well, before I get into the search itself, Judge, may I approach with people's 472, 473, and 474?
Yes.
Ms. Gumman, have you seen those exhibits before?
Yes.
Do those fairly and accurately depict with the similar blue highlights areas where Molly had a train final response?
Yes.
Is that the same Dodge truck?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I move to admit people's exhibits 472, 473, and 474 into evidence.
Mr. Moran?
Your Honor, the same objection. What we have these shapes drawn on the image and a dog that pinpoints to a precise location. So if this is misleading, we object on that basis.
Okay. That objection is overruled. You can cross-examine on it. It'll be an area for the jury to weigh. So 472, 473, and 474 are admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to start with people's 472, please. Now, looking at 472, while I have this up, can you talk the jury through the work that Molly did and the areas that she indicated, and then I can navigate through 473 and 474 as applicable?
I would have begun with her off lead, but I would work a little closer to her and start her, just as my habit, on the front driver tire. I released her from traffic lead and gave her command to search for the odor of human remains. She moved ahead of me, but along the vehicle to the back of the truck, to the back tailgate, and walked towards the passenger front area. I did observe her stutter step or pause momentarily on that back passenger door, just the area. She kept moving. I then turned around, as I always do, and came back along the vehicle with her moving ahead of me, going behind the passenger side, the back of the truck. And when she got to the the front driver back door, she stopped her forward motion and sniffed at the seam. She's a small dog, hence Biddy. So it was just a little bit up from the bottom of the truck, and then provided her train final response of a spit that she detected the odor of human remains.
Is that what we see on 472, generally speaking?
That's the general area.
Okay. Continuing on. I'm going to publish 473. Was there further work done, or should I publish 474 first?
473.
Okay. This is 473.
Based off of her providing a train final response on the outside of the vehicle, I offered to place her on the inside to see if she could provide any information or not. I opened up the driver door and she climbed in and moved directly to the back of the truck seat. And there were luggage back there. And she pushed to the inside on the seat, which you can see in the diagram, past the bags, and backed up and gave her trained final response of a sit that she detected the odor of human remains in that area.
And that's the back seat or the driver's side?
Yes.
Anything in the front seat or the driver's side?
I don't recall getting any indication in the driver's front seat.
And there's no trained final responses noted in your report from any other areas of the interior of the vehicle?
No other indications in the interior of the vehicle, that's correct.
Okay. And then did you continue to search the exterior of the vehicle as well?
The only other thing that I routinely do is if a dog provides trained final response to the odor of human remains on the exterior of the vehicle, I will also offer to place the dog in the back bed of the pickup. I lifted her up to place her in there from the back, and she moved forward and dropped her nose, placing it near the wheel well on the driver's side.
May I publish 474, Judge?
Yes.
Thank you. You said the wheel well by the driver's side?
Yes. And within that big blue box, she indicated, want me to touch it?
Yeah, if you could just point or if you can be more specific, that's great.
She sniffed right in there and then gave her trained final response to the sit that she detected the odor of human remains.
Okay, thank you. Now, when you put a Molly or any canine in the back of a truck, is that canine going to hit every time and do a trained final response every time?
No.
What about the suggestion that you're putting the dog up there so the dog should know? My handler wants the dog to indicate on something.
Good question. Again, I can't say with 100% certainty did me placing her up there cause her to cause her to false alert, but she had already given me other indications. And the only reason I didn't let her jump up in there is because she's small. I'm trying to prolong her working life, so I would have lifted her near the tailgate. And I also wouldn't leave her in there very long.
So this is pursuant to your typical procedure. You get some kind of trained final response on the exterior. Now you're going to move the dog to the interior, and the dog's going to work it. Is this what you would do in any truck?
Ask and answer and quite leading.
It is pretty leading, so let's sustain that.
So I asked you a question that sort of recapped what you'd already said, right? So let me ask you a different question. Is this how you normally proceed under these circumstances?
Yeah.
Answered as well.
Okay, well, I think this is okay, and she answered yes, so go ahead.
Thank you. And in your experience with Molly and with other human remains detection dogs, do they always give you a trained final response in the back of a pickup truck under these circumstances?
No.
So was this notable information to you?
To me as the handler, just to give information.
Okay. And in contrast, we talked about the Chevy truck that had been at the residence, right? On that truck, was there any trained final response on the exterior?
I did not get a trained final response to that vehicle specifically.
So very different than this vehicle.
Yeah.
Now, if we see some stuff in the back of the truck, straps and chains and such. See what I'm talking about in the picture?
Yes.
That kind of stuff there, is that the kind of stuff that can hold odor in your experience?
It's possible.
Okay. And given that you're aware that this search happened over a year after the disappearance, is it within Molly's ability to be able to find the odor of human remains under these circumstances?
Yes.
So, Ms. Gumman, I want to ask you in total about your expert opinion. In your expert opinion as a canine handler and the other ways that the court has qualified you, did Molly locate human remains odor in the places that are on the map that the jury is going to have for Middle Mountain Road?
In my experience, she provided her trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains in fairly specific places on the mountain.
And is that going to be, as you've described before, a large source of human remains, or how would you word it?
I can never say with 100% certainty. I've tried to train her to tell me about large sources of human remains. And just based off the number of indications, I would have to say it was a larger source.
Okay. What's your expert opinion on the odor in the two vehicles in the impound lot?
The two vehicles that Molly indicated to in the impound were consistent train final responses that she was detecting the odor of human remains.
Okay. Similar question regarding the Dodge truck and the truck bed. Did you reach a similar conclusion in your expert opinion as to what Molly was detecting?
I believe that she was detecting the odor of human remains in the back of the pickup.
And then with regard to the defendant's clothing, did you reach conclusions as to what Molly was detecting with a train final response on the defendant's clothing?
Yes, that she was detecting the odor of human remains.
And that would have been on the, how many of the 4 items?
3 out of the 4.
Not the undershirt.
Correct.
And then finally, in the defendant's house, some rooms were cleared and some rooms had train final responses.
Correct.
With regard to where the train final responses are, what's your expert opinion as to what Molly was detecting?
Based off of her train final responses in the home and the number of them, it lends itself to me that there was a large source of human remains odor and not a couple drops of blood.
Thank you.
Ross?
Thank you, Your Honor. Several new things for me today, one of which included your discussion of on a mountainside or out in the great outdoors that you would want to take the dog to a location where there were known items. I can rephrase that if you'd like. What I'm talking about is when you went to Middle Mountain, because of the way the odor and the scent ranges, and it might be downwind, that you want to understand where things have been found, right?
I'll try and clarify. My practice is if an agency calls and says, we found some human remains.
I understand that part of the practice. But what I'm talking about specifically is that when you went to Middle Mountain, you went to the trailhead and down the trail, Susan Beef got sick or was having trouble with the altitude, you were aware that this is a location where items had been found, right?
Yes.
And so the idea is that you don't want to keep going back to places that have already been discovered. What's useful is to find new things, right?
Correct. Cover new area.
And so, you discussed this sort of at length. In certain spots, like a house, you don't want to know where things have been found. You want to go in with as open a mind as possible, right?
Correct.
But at least out on Middle Mountain, on that occasion, you wanted to
human remains odor is going to override a couple drops of blood.
Sure, that wasn't the question. You're not rewarding the dog for alerting in the room. You reward the dog when the dog gets to the source, right?
When the dog presents that it's done the best it can to get to source and provides its trained final response, I would reward.
Let me switch gears a little bit here. Fair to say that dogs will alert to things that have nothing to do with the death of a human being, to it remains from a living person that were left in the area, right?
I guess I don't understand the question. Are there?
Do dogs alert to the remains of a human that is still alive?
Human remains detection dog should not be indicating to a live person.
Right. They wouldn't come up to a live person and tell them they're dead, but they would their human remains, teeth, the blood.
They could possibly do that, yes.
And human remains detection dog handlers train these dogs with placentas, with when people have knee surgeries and there's parts removed from living humans, the dog would still alert to that, right?
Outside of the person?
Yes.
Yes.
You'd agree, and I think you testified a little bit about this undirected, odor can be transferred, right?
Yes.
Like you described the way someone with a glove has been handling remains and then opened the door, right?
Yes.
And you've seen dogs alert to the door handle that was touched with the glove that had remains on it.
Yes.
So if someone walks in an area over where human remains are and then steps somewhere, it can be transferred, right?
I guess I would need more, like, a better descriptor of the details. Is there a bloody scene or?
Well, as much would need to get on the boot as perhaps got on your glove when you touched the doorknob.
It's possible, yes.
And you'd agree odor can be transferred, right?
Yes.
If there are two items, one having the smell of human remains, and that item comes in contact with another item without that odor, the scent of human remains can transfer, right?
It's possible, yes.
So when things are closed or covered, that reduces the ability of the odor to sort of get out and dissipate, right?
Yes.
So you would expect more odor in circumstances where a source is in a closed environment, right?
I would expect that if the odor of human remains is present, an indoor environment is going to hold it longer than an outdoor environment.
So an enclosed space will hold it longer, yes?
Potentially, yes.
Like in a sealed paper bag.
Yes.
When odor has an opportunity to ventilate, the scent's going to get weaker than it would be if it didn't have that opportunity to get out into the air, right?
Anytime you have weather conditions that can move the odor from an outdoor environment, that will cause it to dissipate faster.
Let me do this hypothetical then. So if you take a shirt off of a cadaver and seal it in a bag with clean laundry, give it a few days, and the scent of human remains will be detectable on the formerly clean laundry, right?
It could possibly do that, yes.
And you would agree that first responders who've been to homicides may transfer the scent of human remains on their shoes, and clothing, right?
That can happen, yes.
So it doesn't just have to be a dead person, though, right? It could be anywhere that blood was spilled, a car accident, crime scene, suicide, fist fight, all of those sorts of things, right?
If those, can you re-ask that part of the question?
Sure. Anywhere where there's human blood spilled or anything associated with, I guess, if muscle or fat or some other liquid from a human spilled and a first responder went through that area, that first responder could transfer that smell to other locations, correct?
Yes.
In the 106 days or so before you got into Mr. Redwine's house, do you know how many police officers had been in and out of his house?
I do not.
Or evidence technicians, you wouldn't know that.
I don't have that information.
And you wouldn't know whether or not people who train dogs with human remains went in and out of that house. You don't know that, right?
I don't recall knowing that, correct?
This is all good. I'm sorting through stuff we wanted to talk about today. I want to switch gears here and talk about cueing. You addressed this a little bit on direct, but cueing is the way humans cause false alerts, right?
Yes.
And false alerts happen as a result of both conscious and unconscious handler cueing, right?
Yes.
Try as you might, even you are not immune from the phenomenon.
That is correct.
Dogs pick up on things you're not consciously telling them, and it could be what's happening is humans are cueing the dog to say there's human remains and there's not. That's cueing, right?
Cueing in the realm of detection dog work would be the dog gives its trained final response and there's no source of odor present. And then we go to the handler cue with some body language, whether it's conscious or unconscious.
Switching gears again a little bit, I want to come back to cueing, but just to establish this quickly. With respect to residual scent, and I know you prefer to say odor is odor, but with residual scent, which means that the scent source is no longer there. So Mr. Bogan's gone, but it still smells like Mr. Bogan. Okay. That we would call residual scent. You agree with me on that?
Yes.
And there's no certification for residual scent, right?
That I'm aware of, no organization, national organization, tests cadaver dogs on whether or not they're going to provide a trained final response to residual odor as you described.
And you talked about how certification is how, in more reliable setting, you demonstrate things that a dog can do, right?
Are you asking what the intention of a certification is?
That is one of them, though, right? That you're demonstrating in a controlled setting what a dog can do.
Yes.
And certification is important to demonstrate reliability, right?
Certification and training logs and unknown training blind would be where you're going to develop a level of reliability versus the field.
You're involved in the certification process based on your testimony from direct, right?
Okay. Yes.
And you had a dog that was doing residual scent work as far back as 2012 and even some before that, right?
You're talking about Molly, if she was demonstrating that she would indicate when source was removed?
No, I'm talking about something different. This certification does not exist, even though handlers have been talking about dogs doing residual scent work for at least since 2012, right?
It goes further back than that, but yes.
You would agree that like dogs, people can have, or I'm sorry, like people, dogs can have bad days.
Yes.
And since dogs can't speak to us, at least in English, it's tough to tell whether or not a dog's having a bad day sometimes. Is that right?
Yes.
And so that's another reason you would agree human remains, dogs do occasionally alert to locations where human remains are not present.
That is possible, yes.
Because in the end, dogs aren't perfect.
Correct.
And unlike laboratory equipment, like with DNA analysis or like an intoxilizer, we can't disassemble the dog to tell whether or not there's a calibration error, right?
Yes.
And that's part of why people in the business, folks like yourself, say this is not a hard science, right?
There's a science aspect to it, but there's so much we don't know.
So that's why some folks say art and science.
Yes.
And you touched on this a little bit in direct, that that's part of why you wouldn't have your dog run by another handler, right?
Correct.
Because you need to be present to do the proper interpretation, right?
We certify as a team. So Molly and Karen have to be a certified team.
So unlike in the sense of like the DNA analysis equipment or the detoxifier equipment that you have some familiarity with, where we can replicate the results. If someone's trained on how to use the equipment, you can replicate it every time, or that would be hard science, right?
Correct.
But in this sort of art and science realm, it requires you to do it, right?
It requires a lot of my interpretation.
Because there have been occasions with a dog that you run where somebody else took the dog to see if they could demonstrate some of the reliability that you testified to.
Oh, I don't understand that question.
It was a case in Wisconsin.
Okay.
And my understanding was that the dog was provided to another handler when they were going to go demonstrate if the dog could do some of the things that had been claimed.
Oh, no.
And then the ultimately it was decided that after that experiment, that the dog's testimony was not going to be allowed.
Oh, I guess I don't understand what you're talking about.
I forget whether it was the Sackett case or it may have been a case with a Latino surname.
Oh, Zappel in Milwaukee.
Is that the one where someone else did the run with the dog?
No one's ever run Molly on a case except me. So I don't
This
know.
was more for a demonstrative purpose or prior to admissibility.
I would have never had someone else work her.
Okay.
And maybe I don't.
If I misunderstood, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
There's been testimony about occasions where your dog, where you have been allowed to testify as an expert in dog handling. There have also been cases where you have not been allowed to, right?
There have been cases where the dog evidence was not allowed into a trial that I testified to both as a handler and one time as like an overview of how the dogs work. Yeah.
Given that we can't talk to the dogs or disassemble them to ensure proper calibration, we rely on certification as an important part of verifying their reliability, right?
Yes.
And training and certification, that's what makes up a dog's reliability.
What I would look at for developing reliability.
Well, she's answering your question. You may not like the way she's answering it, but she doesn't like the way you phrase it. She just wants to tell the whole truth. I'm not going to answer the question.
This is straight out of a transcript.
Well, it could be, and you can ask her that in a minute, but let her answer your question now.
Do you want to re-ask me the question?
Yes. So, training and certification, that's what makes up a dog's reliability. Is the question to which you responded, yes. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. And with your private business that you testified to on Direct Canine Search Solutions, you would require certification for your dog, right?
For my personal dog, I would want the dog team to have a national certification in order to do search work. Is that your question?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. And you to require certification if it was your case. If somebody was coming to you and saying, you need help, you would only assign out dogs that have the certification, right?
To the best of my ability, if I were to refer a dog team, I would want to be aware that those teams have national certification on a regular basis.
You did not recommend other dogs that were used in this case, did you?
The only other dog team that I had any involvement with was Sue Beef. And Sue is a longtime handler in cases around the United States. And Jean Ralston had asked for Sue or I to help. I was originally asked, but I asked Sue to go for the water search. And then she came, but I had no knowledge of any other dogs.
That's who I remember was up on Middle Mountain and struggling with the altitude. Am I remembering that wrong?
Sue was with she came one time prior and did some water work, searching for Dylan, I think. And then she was along and helped with the 2-day search on the mountains that I did in August of 2013.
You had the opportunity to see a dog handler deployed in this investigation testify. You remember that back in June of 2019?
Yeah, no, instead.
Mr. Moran?
This is to the point that she's only recommending folks who are certified, and that her dogs are. Certification has been testified to at length. Sets the stage for other witnesses.
It's beyond the scope.
It is beyond the scope. Why don't you come up, Lee? I want to hear this up here. Go ahead, Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Your Honor. On all of the occasions when you're seeking to have your dog certified, that exam didn't require identification of residual stamp, right?
Correct.
And your testimony was that you prefer to say odor is odor, right?
Yes.
But that's really simplifying it, right? Because what we're talking about is 478 different volatile organic compounds. Is that right?
Yes.
And those compounds exist in different concentrations depending on the length of time a body has been decomposing, right?
Correct.
So in hours 0 to 1, the body is decomposing in a different way than it is 6 months to a year, right?
I think I understand your question. So stop me if I don't.
I meant it as sort of a yes or no question. I mean, there's a huge difference in the volatile organic compound concentration of someone who's recently deceased and someone who's been deceased for months. Yes?
Yes.
I mean, it's not humans could detect, right?
Yes.
Beg your pardon for jumping around. I'm coming back to cueing now. Part of why certification is so important is to ensure cueing is minimized, right?
The setup of the certification would be so there isn't queuing. Yes.
Minimize it to the best extent possible, right?
Yes.
Some folks advocate for doing that sort of testing with double blind, so no one around the problem knows where the scent source is, correct?
Yes.
But what you've described is single blind. So when you walk into the area, you don't know, but someone else in the room might, correct?
In the space, that would be single blind, yes.
And you don't think double blind is necessary, right?
It's not that I don't think it's necessary. I have some reservations about utilizing it more because training the dogs is priority for me. And there's some pros and cons to double blind testing.
The idea behind it, at least, and I don't need to get too deep in the weeds on double blind, though, is that you don't have anybody in the room who knows and could cue because dogs are that sensitive, right?
That's the concept behind double blind, yes.
They can read minute movements and switches in our face that we actually are not aware are occurring, right?
That is possible, yes.
We were talking about the clever hands effect. That's the name of the horse or the name of the horse training? Anyway, not important. The point being, though, that like nobody could detect how this guy was signaling the horse, and they brought him into laboratories and scientists watched it, right?
They eventually figured it out, but for a long period of time, people believed that the horse was counting.
So with double blind testing, some part of the theory is that what happens is if a handler believes that there should be a particular outcome, they can elicit that response from the dog, right?
That is possible, yes.
And scientific publications have confirmed that phenomenon, right?
From Lisa Litt's research?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And you testified that about that on direct, right?
We talked a little bit about that research project.
And it was printed in the Journal of Animal Cognition, right?
I've seen it so many different places, but yes.
Okay. And you mentioned on direct that it was published in 2007. It was in fact 2011. Would you disagree with that?
Oh, you're correct. It was 2011.
And you mentioned that a lot of good things came as a result of that study, that there was a greater understanding of the cueing effect handlers have on dogs as a result of her work, right?
I would agree that research definitely gives us pause to really pay attention to our expectations and trying to figure out ways to identify if we're cueing, whether it's consciously or subconsciously.
So I understood you correct on direct, that you were saying it's important understanding about what dogs are doing came out of her work, and we made modifications, right?
We definitely looked at it when it came out in 2011. I don't recall when I learned of it, and it took some time to process it. That was a sting.
So it may not have, what this stinging rebuke, frankly, that came from Dr. Litt, may not have been something that you incorporated into your work by November 2012, or had you been aware of it having been printed in 2011?
I don't recall when that research would have surfaced in my work. I don't know.
In your work, have you become familiar with that publication, the Journal of Animal Cognition?
I did, yes.
And it's peer-reviewed, right?
Yes.
And this study by Dr. Litton, she had other people working with her, other researchers, other doctors, trying to get a greater understanding of this phenomenon that you've been testifying about.
Yes.
And the title of her publication and study was Handler Believes Affect Scent Detection Dog Outcomes, right?
Yes.
And what she did was gathered dogs that were law enforcement dogs, correct?
Yes.
Undoubtedly certified by the same organizations that you have testified about on direct today, right?
I don't know, but my understanding of the research was that they utilized like 18 law enforcement working explosive and narcotics dogs to conduct the research. And I'm assuming that they were certified in order to be out working in the field. Whose certification, I don't know, depending upon what part of the country.
And that's some part of that exists within working dog discipline, that there are different certifying agencies all around the country. Yes?
Yes.
Some better than others.
Yes.
And there's a lacking standardization nationwide for what qualifies as a reliable dog that should be certified, right?
Say that part again.
I'm maybe even more simply, there are agencies, there are organizations that will certify a dog that, based on your reactions, you think that's disappointing, that there are organizations out there that certify dogs that should not be certified as far as you're concerned.
I think that there's always room for improvement with certifying working dogs in any field.
That's a little bit of an aside. With respect to Dr. Lisa Litt's study about handler beliefs impact outcomes, the dogs that they selected were dogs doing very important work, looking for dope and looking for explosives, right?
Yes.
So critically important police work. Hopefully these dogs are good at finding explosives, if that's what we've got them doing out there, right?
Yes.
And what happened was these dogs were brought in and told, for the bomb dogs, or the explosive dogs, the handler was told, in this location, there's explosives. Go find it, essentially, right?
Yes.
And 85% of the time, 80+% of the time, once the handler's been told that, the handler comes out and says, dog found it, there's explosives in there, right?
It was a high percentage.
And the whole model and design of this study was that there was nothing in there, right?
They did everything they could to make sure there was not transfer odor or residual odor of the target odor. So it was set up clean, no source.
So simply allowing the handler to think that there's something in here that your dog should chew on would, at least Dr. Litt and her comrades studied, the dogs are going to alert, the handler thinks they should, right?
Yes, that research showed that.
Part of how this, maybe in hindsight, isn't super surprising is because the dogs that are chosen are dogs that are focused, clear-headed, right? That's the kind of dog that you want, a dog that's going to really pay attention to the handler.
Yes.
Or other humans, frankly, right?
When they first come, they're usually enjoy interacting with humans. As they become more seasoned, you'll see a lot of dogs not give attention to anyone but their handler, because that's who's been paying them all along.
One of the criteria for selecting a working dog is the degree of attention that a dog would pay to his or her handler, and you want a dog that's going to pay attention to what the handler is doing, right?
Yes.
And that's why you were describing on direct that you need to minimize the amount of information you have, because you know you can't escape this phenomenon where you could cue the dog.
I know that that is a possibility, yes.
But what happened here was that you had some understanding that the child had come to visit his father, were aware of the photographs at the airport and Walmart, roughly.
I did know that he had arrived in Durango and,
Yes.
Then at least by the time you're at Mr. Redwine's house and near his truck, you know that this person, who is the last one to have been seen with Dylan, your dog said that there was a dead body on its stuff, right?
indicated to the odor of human remains, yes.
So as much as maybe it's best practice or ideal to not have a bunch of information going in, you, as the day wears on, are getting more and more specific information.
Most likely that occurs, yes.
And before, I mean, just because we're intelligent humans experiencing the world, that's what's happening as the day wears on. You've got a briefing, you've shown Mr. Redwine's clothes, you've taken to his house, you've driven from Durango to Vallecito, like all through the day it's occurring to you, like more and more of what is the hypothesis of law.
Is that a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, am I?
You're putting it together. You're understanding the hypothesis as much as you'd like to create. You have a blank mind. That's not possible with someone
It's very
with your law
plausible.
enforcement.
Yes.
Okay. And there was this other thing that was described, the experiment that happened at the impound lot. One of those vehicles, you could smell the human remains, right?
I don't recall smelling anything because I didn't get close to any of the cars at the initial experiment. So I don't recall.
Okay. Biddy wasn't on lead. Right?
She was off leash.
So Biddy went up to a vehicle where there had been a gunshot victim in the vehicle, right?
I don't recall the vehicles, and I just recall doing the sniff. So I can't help you out there.
Did Molly jump up on the vehicle, and was Molly getting on that vehicle where there had been a sort of grisly human event?
I don't recall if she jumped on anything. She sometimes will get up on her hind legs to sniff.
Sniff in the window, right?
I'll see that on occasion, and I don't recall if that's what her behavior was. It's possible.
I mean, that would be pretty unfortunate here if she did get, and forgive my vernacular, but blood and guts on her jumping on that car, because then it's on her the rest of the day, right?
That is always a concern, yes.
You're not bathing her, right?
From one location to another that day, no.
Or even the entire time she's in Colorado, is that right?
I did not bathe her when she was here.
Moran, 5 o'clock is a hard stop. Yes, sir.
You testified that you have several different disciplines that you're trained in, right? Certification in narcotics dogs, right?
No, that I have certified in?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes, I've certified cadaver dogs and patrol dogs. I mean, I have, with my dog, taken the test and certified.
So in addition to this expertise in being a handler of a human remains detection dog, you have also run narcotics detection animals, correct?
I, for 10 years, had a dog for the department that did narcotics detection.
And you would agree that if a dog is alerting on a vehicle indicating the presence of narcotics, that that's a vehicle you might search, right? You would have probable cause at that point to search the car.
In Wisconsin, we did, yes.
Objection or relevance?
Relevance here, Mr. Moran?
That it goes to the impact residual effect has on a trainer and what it means in that context, because it is highly probative of how it should be treated in this context. When drugs are not detected, people are not charged with and brought to trial on their possession, which is different than the residual sense to remains being indicated as has been testified here, and someone having to face that evidence as evidence that there's ever a dead body in that house.
This is a argumentative speaking objection, Your Honor, and maybe more appropriate for closing argument as counsel wants, but this isn't an appropriate record right now.
Yeah, I can clarify that it's gotten to be late in the day, and I'm reacting to the look on Your Honor's face. And I'm happy to explain it in different contexts, but
Well, your explanation made no sense to me in terms of this case, so I'm going to sustain the objection. And I'm sorry, I gave away my answer before I moved. So do you have more than a minute or two?
oh yeah,
All right. I do. Okay. We have to stop at 5 on Tuesdays for sure. Everybody wants to stop at 5, but on Tuesdays we have to stop at 5. So, ladies and gentlemen, please don't discuss this case either amongst yourselves or with anyone else during the course of the trial. Do not initiate, post, or respond to anything about this case on social media. In fairness to the parties of this lawsuit, you should keep an open mind throughout the trial. You should reach your decision only during your deliberations. Do not permit any third person to discuss the case in your presence, and if they can attempt to do so over your objection, please let me know. Don't talk with any witnesses of the defendant or the lawyers in the case. Don't gather any information on your own. Don't do any outside reading. Don't visit any places mentioned in the case. Don't read about the case in the newspaper or obtain information about it from the radio, television, internet, social media, or the media source. Don't try and learn about the case outside the courtroom. You must base your verdict solely on the evidence presented at trial. With that, hope you have a good night, and we'll get you back here at 10 to 8 tomorrow. Everybody rise for the jury.